Hola, ¿qué tal?
Yo creo que nos conocimos una vez.
Hace tiempo. Sí, hace tiempo. Wait, you know that Friday is Cuban Independence Day, right?
Friday's Cuban Independence.
Yeah. Just, keep it in the back of your mind in case it comes up. 1902.
1902.
Okay.
I'll just get the conferences quicker.
Ladies and gentlemen, please have your seats. Take your seats. Okay, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with all of you about an issue that I think should get even more attention and more importantly, smart, intelligent treatment in the public policy debates here in Washington. I'm Roger Noriega. I'll be sort of leading the conversation with our guest, Antonio Rodiles, who really needs no introduction because of his leadership in Cuba as one of the opposition leaders, well respected, someone who's taken very serious risks for principles and values that we all care about and which are in dangerously short supply in Cuba today, notwithstanding some of the misunderstandings about the Cuban reality that's attended the policy shift in the United States in the last many months. Antonio, as the notice that we've distributed here says, is a coordinator of the Cuban Forum for Rights and Freedoms, as well as for the citizen demand for different Cuba, la demanda ciudadana por otra Cuba y todos marchamos, we all march, a citizen protest initiative. And we're honored to have him here. I'm not going to go on with much of introductory comments of my own because I think it's more important that we get to the discussion. And after he and I have an opportunity to have an initial exchange, we'll throw it open to questions in about 30 minutes or so. So let me ask you all to silence your emails. I'm sorry, your telephone machines. I'm kind of an old guy. Let me just say, I'm going to ask Antonio to sort of set the table for our audience. Many of you know Cuba pretty well. Some may not. I remember traveling to Cuba in 1998 during Pope John Paul II's visit, and I heard two Eastern European diplomats describe Cuba as a Stalinist regime. One was Czech, one was Polish, and I figured they know what they were talking about. And I'm not sure that we understand here in this country what that means in 2016, a quarter century after the fall of the Berlin Wall. How can the average American understand what constitutes a totalitarian government? And when I see some of the neophytes treating this, both in the media or in the White House, I think of Jurassic Park, where the archaeologists said, no, these are living animals and they're dinosaurs and they're deadly, but the neophytes insist on taking a selfie with the velociraptor, and I think about that when I see Ben Rhodes leading this policy debate or President Obama getting his picture taken in front of Che Guevara mural, and it's you just think of that, the dinosaur sort of devouring the people there in the pith helmet trying to get their selfie with a dinosaur. So what is the nature of this totalitarian regime in Cuba today that you're coping with, and what are the everyday risks that you run as an opposition figure in Cuba just because you disagree with the government?
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here, all the people. Thank you, Roger, to be here. Well, I'm going to ask one word to the description that you were doing. I'm going to put the word tropical, because when you go to Cuba and you see the way that the regime is repressing all the opposition, the dissident, anybody that speak out, they always are introducing a factor that probably you never see before in Europe or in other places. They introduce music, people dancing. They are introducing certain things that for the rest of the people that are not familiar with the Cuban situation, they don't understand exactly what is happening. And this is something that we can see, especially in the last time, during the President Obama visit, the Sunday when he was arriving, they organized a repressing act against the opposition movement, and they took a group of people to dance after the repression. And many of the journalists that were there, they were really surprised because they didn't understand this kind of situation where you have a people trying to do a pacific manifestation, you have the secret police beating the protesters, and also after you have people dancing with music. And then this is the kind of a scenario that sometimes we are facing in Cuba, and sometimes people from outside doesn't understand. I think that this is a really difficult situation. Right now, the regime in some way feel more comfortable. They feel with more legitimacy. And now our experience say that they are more violent. They are beating more the people from the opposition, especially women. They are, everybody knows, I think, that one of the leaders group in the Cuban opposition movement are the ladies in white. And they have been trying for a long time to use the public space also to go there and to talk and to make sometimes silence manifestation. And the regime have been repressing that group for a long time. You were mentioned in the introduction that I am in part of the campaign, that the name is We All March. And the idea of that campaign is to retake the public space. In Cuba, the government has like a slogan, and they say, the street is for Fidel, or is from Fidel. Esta calle es de Fidel. And what that means is that no people can go to the street to say what they think, to have any kind of public manifestation. And we are now focused to change that situation inside of the island.
So sort of reclaim public space.
Exactly.
And so one of the assumptions behind President Obama's opening to Cuba is that the regime could be coaxed to open up, at least economically, if we build new partnerships and introduce new technology, for example. One of the deals that he's licensed is to build 1940s era tractors with a company that's run by the Cuban military. So I don't really see the aerating the system quite yet. The proposition is based on a narrative that Raul Castro is a frustrated reformer, and that Fidel is the hardliner in the regime. A recent Economist article painted a picture of Raul as a pragmatist, who's managed to hold his tongue for 60 years, while his brother runs this communist dictatorship. So that's the narrative. We saw the same thing here, and it's been well exposed on Iran, where Rouhani was portrayed as the reformer, open to the West. After his election, we could get serious about moving forward on Iran. And then it turned out that we actually started the negotiations under Ahmadinejad. So that's the narrative. Now the narrative is back to Cuba. Raul Castro, who's been a dictator since 2008, and has been in control of the country's military for 60 years, is somehow the frustrated reformer. So there are some supposed changes that have been advertised by advocates of President Obama's opening. Some changes in people being able to be self-employed and all that. What is the real context that Cuba is living in right now versus the image of what the media and what some apologists for President Obama's strategy give the rest of us? What's the reality in terms of what you see on the ground from this new Raul regime and Raul era?
Well, I think you have in all of these totalitarian regimes, sometimes the strategy that different political actors play, and some of them try to show like they are the good policeman, and the others show that they are the bad policeman. And I think that has been the reality in Cuba. Sometimes Raúl is the good guy, sometimes Fidel is the good guy. And right now they have been selling that idea that Raúl is the person that is pragmatic. He wants to produce certain change, but Fidel and the people that surround him don't allow that. I think that 10 years after, and I think we need to put in context, it's not 1 year, it's not 2 years, it's more than 2 presidential periods here in US. It's 10 years after we see the same nature of the regime. They are really violent. They don't want to allow people to get rich, they say openly. They have been telling clearly, we are not going to move even 1 millimeter. And sometimes people say, no, they are only telling that, but at the end they are going to move. No, 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 they are honest. Mm-hmm. And they show that they are honest in that sense. They don't want to move, and they don't move. And I think that what we have here, if we, in some way, we want to understand quickly which is the logic of the regime, we need to understand that they are moving in the direction to have a kind of tropical dynasty. And the person that is now receiving most of the power is the son of Raúl Castro. You can see during the speech of the President Obama in the theater in Havana that you have in that balcony, you have 3 generations of Castros. You have Raúl Castro, the son of Raúl Castro, and the grandson of Raúl Castro. Then if we want to be objective, we need to realize that they are working really hard, and right now they are doing well, to try to success this transition to his son. And I like to say that they are trying to create an illusion. They want to say, we are going to do certain steps in 2018, and after little by little. And what they are doing is the classical trick that they are showing something here, but they are doing back all the transfer of power. Did you see what is happening now, for example, in the military? They are removing all the people that are over 60 and 65 years. That is happening also in the Communist Party. That was one of the results of the Communist Party meeting that finished a few weeks ago. They have different times. They say, well, we are going to remove certain people now in 2016. The next step is going to be in 2018. And the final step is going to be in 2021. Then they have the plan. And what they are doing is to try to gain time. And they are selling the idea or the fantasy that they are going to do certain steps. But what they are doing is concrete steps to transfer the power to their family and to their political allies. I think if we want to understand what happened in the Communist Party, if we want to understand the signal that they sent during the President Obama visit, if we want to understand what they are doing, we need to focus in the dynasty construction that they are doing.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because the president, and I am not going to question his good faith. I do question his judgment. But I think he believed that he could sort of, if he created some space, reduce the level of hostility, take that historic measure to go there, legitimize them with the political recognition, that it would, generate some space to sort of Raúl to get in touch with his inner reformer. And then you see the dynastic transition and the President of the United States licensing transactions with military entities that are essentially operated by the Castro family. So on the contrary, rather than moving to where you're kind of opening up the possibilities of transition, they're actually going with Raúl Castro's plan A, which is passing power within the family. A dynastic regime here we are in the well into the 21st century. Let's turn a second to President Obama's personal engagement in this opening to the Castro regime. We all saw the clumsy news conference at the end of their meetings in which President Obama seemed genuinely irritated by Raúl, the generalissimo. You were part of the group of dissidents that met with President Obama in Havana. Tell me a little bit about what you told him. How was he receiving this? Did you find what he said particularly compelling or convincing? Did he seem open to your comments, or was he sort of just going through the motions?
Well, I believe that the President Obama wants to provoke a kind of positive change in Cuba, but we need to be realistic. We need to be pragmatic. And in the scenario that we are facing, even the law that is ruling in Cuba doesn't allow that steps. The violation of the human rights in Cuba is part of the law. And this is something crucial to understand. This is not because a person is violating my rights, or an institution is violating my rights. No, it's part of the law. It's part of the structure of the law in Cuba. Then all the package that President Obama was announcing in 2014, in December, not any of that measures can put in place because the law doesn't allow that. Then I think that this is something important to understand. And also then, in that context, the people that are taking advantage of that steps are the military, are the NGOs from the government. Then they have been creating a kind of fake civil society. And all of these people are taking advantage of all of the new policy. Then we need to understand that there is a huge difference to deal with certain regimes where you don't have, you have lack of freedoms or like that, or you are dealing with a totalitarian regime. They have the whole control, and they can do whatever they want because they are completely over the state platform. Then in relation with the visit of the President Obama, fortunately, I think that the visit had a good result. Honestly, I think one of the situations that provoked that the visit had a good result was the pushing from the opposition movement. The Cuban government never before need to face a group of oppositors going to the street, articulated to do this kind of protest, and they react in the way that always they react. They were violent, and they want to send a signal that they are not going to allow us to do anything. But at the same time, they did be in front of all the foreign press. And I think that created an environment for the rest of the visit because they were really, really aggressive, and everybody was surprised with the reaction that they had. Then during the visit, I think that the violence from the government continued during the whole time. And even we need to call to the embassy to tell them, please, you need to send a car to take us to the meeting, because if not, probably we are not going to arrive. They are going to arrest us in our way. I think, honestly, it was a good meeting. It was like almost 2 hours. The situation was different. The scenario was different in relation with the previous visit of Secretary of State John Kerry. Some of my colleagues decided to don't go to that meeting because we didn't understand that the American government accept the condition from the regime, and they didn't invite us to the official reopening of the embassy. But in that case, the situation was different. We received an invitation. The meeting was in the schedule, the official schedule, and I think that was a good opportunity to tell directly to the President Obama what we think about the situation that we are facing. And my main message was, Mr. President, you and the United States need to decide who are your friends. The people that are pushing and facing the Cuban regime, we are the friends of U.S., of the democracy war, and we are taking the risk for that. And we need the support of you, and we need a clear message also to the Cuban regime. We have been telling from the beginning that we agree with the political process as a way to resolve the Cuban dilemma. We think that the best way to resolve that situation is a political process, but we need a real political process. And not a kind of situation where the government is taking more advantage, and the Cuban people, and even the U.S., is not receiving what we need. And I think this is something that many people are complaining. Inside of the opposition, there is a huge group. We have a platform that the name is the Forum for the Rights and Freedoms. And we have a roadmap where we are asking, if we want to resume what we are asking, is the implementation of the UN Human Rights Covenants. It's something simple. They signed that covenant in 2008, but they don't want to ratify that covenant. And why? Because they need to change then the internal law. And then they need to dismantle the totalitarian regime from inside, and they don't want that. Then I think that here we are in front of a clear dilemma, is who are the people that is going to benefit from this new political process? Mm-hmm. And that, I think, need to be completely clear, not only in signal, if not in actions too.
Absolutely, and I think that's extraordinarily important that we continue to hold the administration, keep this dialogue open, because I found the president's speech that he gave in Havana very powerful in certain ways, and a very eloquent defense and appeal, and reminding Cubans that they have a basic right to human dignity and decide their own future. I think, and and I was pleased with that statement. And I assume Cubans were too. Tell me a little bit about their reaction to his message, to that address particularly. And also give me an idea of, do you think that Cubans will ever test the ability of the system to keep them under control? I have this impression of the regime in certain ways. I mean, very, very, violent and efficient in dispensing that violence to control the people, but also sort of this kind of a brittle model, this whole, certainly delegitimized in terms of humanity. So do you think that the president might eventually be credited with raising expectations so much that it will move Cubans to act in a way that the regime can't control?
Well, first, in relation with the speech, I think that was a really good speech. Of course, when we are inside of this political scenario and these political dynamics, we always expect more. And sometimes I was expecting from the president to talk directly about the opposition movement and the repression directly against women and like that. But even though I think that the reaction of the people was good, they listened for the first time during almost 60 years, a person talking openly about what's mean the freedom of the human being. He talked about Miami, and I think that people like to listen all of this kind of thing. In fact, probably here you didn't see, probably the press didn't show that, I don't know, but around the theater was like 3 or 4 places where you have the confrontation from citizens with the police. Because some people start to protest, they repress the person, after another person start to complain. That happened in 3 or 4 focus around the theater. I think that after the speech, during some time, people were talking a lot about what they were listening, especially the situation that he was remarking about that the people that are the responsible of the situation, the economic situation, are the Cuban regime. He say, well, I think even if we finish with embargo, the situation is not going to change too much because you need to change certain things. Everybody listened at that point. And I think that that was important. The situation was that after the visit, they tried to do something similar that they did when the John Paul II visit Cuba. They were trying to, I don't know how to say in English, encapsulate.
Sort of capture?
Exactly. To close, to create like a kind of bubble, no?
Oh, okay.
Around the visit.
Yeah.
And then they start to talk about the Communist Congress Party, and a lot of articles start to attack the president position, well, they were like in a block against what happened during the visit. Even though I think that the message is there, and we can see after a year that we have been working, also distributing a lot of information, going to the street, organize a protest, the speech, and after, and I think that it is strange probably to understand, but I think that the Communist Party was good for us, for the opposition movement, because they were so clear, and the message was so clear. Mm-hmm. And then when you have all of these elements, the result that we have right now is that in Cuba, you have more people ready to manifestate, ready to protest. And I think that this is a really good signal. Even the Channel Parade, can I say that in English? El desfile de Chanel.
Oh, yes, remember that model fashion show?
Yeah. I think that
Chanel.
That was great for us. Mm-hmm. Because this is something like irrational to understand. You have like a small place where you have people with fashion and glamour and everything, and you have few meters people living in completely a miserable condition. And this is completely opposed to the speech that the regime have had during all these years. But the good point here is that the Castro's family was there too. Mm. Then how people are receiving all this signal, how people are receiving this situation, and I think that this is a good opportunity also for the opposition movement to show that there is no possible solution in Cuba if these people keep in power. And I think that this is something crucial for me and for many people that we are working together to show to the whole international community, to show to the Cuban people, to show to everybody that if the Castro family is there, nothing is going to change. Mm. And I think that this is not something new for totalitarian regimes. There are many countries where we have that certain group of people have the monopoly of the power, and if you don't remove these people from there, nothing is going to change. And corruption, for example. Corruption is something completely tied to this family and to this regime. And if we want a positive change in Cuba, we need to remove all of these elements. If not, we are going to have a mess. Even worse than the situation that we are living right now.
That's very profound. And again, I would hasten to add, it's really important to continue to discuss these things while President Obama is still in office, because he has placed a bet that this opening would bring about change. Frankly, I hope he's right. I don't think he will be proven correct, but I hope that he's right. It's interesting that some of the multinationals and companies that wanted to do business in Cuba that were agitating for the change in U.S. policy, I'm now hearing from a lot of them, there's no opportunity in Cuba. They've gone, they've been taken on their snipe hunts on the island and looking for business, and the people, the interlocutors that they talk with are, these government bureaucrats who have no position to sort of make deals or make decisions on their own, and they're seeing the system that really the opportunity is not there, so it's already lost momentum. But I don't question the president's good intentions, and I hope that he is more rigorous as he leaves office when he sees that the system is absolutely not going to change. I also hope that the Cuban people test their own government. I saw a video, I'm sure you've seen it, of a woman who said something against the regime, and so they descend on her and push her into a police car, and some people intervened and just took her very gently, pushed the police aside, took her by the arm and took her out of the police car. And I've heard from other people that that's happening more and more. Yeah. It's really very interesting. But let's go back to this proposition that these economic openings, that letting tourists go and investments and all these things, the cuentapropistas, the people who are self-employed, that this will gradually open up political space and all that. What are your thoughts on that? Is that, I mean, an efficient, effective way to bring about political change? Is this economic empowerment?
I don't think that we can split the freedom in different aspects. I think that if you have the freedom to express yourself, if you have the freedom of association, if you have the economic freedoms too, this is the only way to construct a different society. I don't think that we can split right now where is finishing the economic freedom and where start the civic and political freedom and rights. On another hand, I think that the Cuban regime is completely sending a clear message that they are not going to allow any kind of political economic freedom for the Cuban people. They say that explicitly in the Communist Party meeting. And they in the way that they construct the new scenario for the entrepreneurs, the so-called cuentapropistas, it is clear that they are not going to allow that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put just one example. If you see the tax system that is operating in Cuba right now, well, they have a progressive system that after $2,000 per year, $2,000 per year, you need to pay 50% of your income. Who can pay that? Then, at the same time, and this is to exemplify how is corruption working, you have, for example, the price of utilities. Some people that have a good restaurant, they need to pay per month 90,000 Cuban pesos for the electricity. But if you need to pay after 50,000, you need to pay 50%. And in 1 month, you are consuming 90,000. How you can explain that? Mm-hmm. Everything in Cuba now is related with corruption. And what we are building now in this, with this logic of about cuentapropistas and small businesses and all of this kind of thing, is a network of corruption, mm-hmm. completely related with the power. Mm-hmm. It's a loyal group of people to the regime that knows perfectly that if they in some moment start to take position different than the one the regime wants, you are done.
And what percentage of the cuentapropistas themselves are sort of retirees from the military or from the regime itself?
Well, most of the people that have good restaurant and another kind of business are related with the Cuban government. In some way, one way or another, they are related. Mm-hmm. And they need to do that because if not, they don't have the connections. And again, this is not something new for this kind of totalitarian regimes. See what was happening in Russia and in other countries, and then we realize which is the way that can take, or the path that can take this proposal that we are receiving now as a society. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think that the idea to empowerment the people is for sure a good idea. But we need to have the tools to do that in practice. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the good point here. The American government has the power, has the possibility to push in order that the regime implement a change of the law in order that people can get empowerment. And I think that this is the goal right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we have the both government, or the American government and the Cuban regime, reestablish the relation. Okay, what is next? What we need to do now in order that this new policy or this new political process really help to the Cuban people. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is not a message not only for the actual administration, also for the future president or in U.S. What we are going to do, what kind of Cuba we have for the future. Mm-hmm. How Cuba can affect the region and also U.S. in the future if we don't have, we are not constructing a real rule of law or a real democracy in Cuba. Precisely. And I think that this is something crucial now to understand in what direction we are going to move.
I think that's exactly right. And the reason you can't separate economic rights and political freedoms is because the pillar underneath both of them is the rule of law. And if you don't have the rule of law, you're not going to be able to build an economy of any size or sustainability. So this is the real challenge. I got an email from a Cuban American who was afraid that I was going to be very hard line against the president's policies. And he said, in his opinion was, if a Cuban is asked to choose between whether they have political freedom or have an economic opportunity to feed their families, they're going to choose economic freedom. The injustice is that Cubans are forced to make that decision. And until the president came along, we're talking about a regime that's made it a binary choice. You either engage the Cuban regime or you engage the Cuban people. You cannot really do both. And until President Obama came along, presidents decided to not engage the regime, and different levels of intensity and creativity, those presidents tried to help the Cuban people. And that's, I hope, again, where I think President Obama's administration will come around at the end. One final thing about, and this is where we get a lot of attention, is the tourism. Because, it's not supposed to be tourism. They're now talking in Capitol Hill about lifting the travel ban. The fact is, hundreds of thousands of Americans travel to Cuba every year in different categories. It's supposed to be sort of purposeful travel, cultural, education, scientific, religious, that sort of thing. Now, without any kind of specific licensing, I think you're going to see, rum tours and marina tours and just, tourists filling up hotels that are owned by the military. I mean, most people don't know that the Cuban military controls more hotel rooms than Disney. It's one of the biggest tourism companies in Latin America, is run by the Cuban military. But I actually encourage Cubans to go. I encourage people to go to Cuba if they go with certain purposes and want to really want to sort of understand what's happening in that economy. When I see Kim Kardashian there and Chanel, there's never a velociraptor around when you need one, but that's kind of disgusting. But I think it's good to have this kind of contact, people-to-people contact. How does the regime go about sort of controlling that? What are your thoughts on general about Americans visiting? 3 million Canadians and Europeans visit every year, and it hasn't brought about any political change. But what are your thoughts about that issue, and how does the regime restrict what tourists are able to do?
Well, in the 90s, the situation was different. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the Cuban regime didn't have the structure to control tourists. Then many people used to go to houses to rent. They used to have private taxis to move in the city. They visit private restaurants. But right now, the situation is a little bit different, because all of the tourists that are arriving to the country, most of them go using tourist package. Can I say like that?
Yes.
Then the people that are controlling that inside of Cuba, again, are companies that are related with the army. Then most of the time they are moving in buses through the cities. They take these people sometimes to paladars, but the paladars or restaurants, they are the one that are related with the people from the elite. They take, after they finish, they take to another place and like that, they never had a real contact with the people.
Right.
And this is a little bit different. I have been talking with a lot of taxi drivers, and I have been asking, how is going the business? They say, well, it's not the same like before. Because in the 90s, we used to move more people, and now they are moving all the time in the buses. Then it is clear that now the Cuban regime is more prepared to control the contact with the people than before. And I think for sure, if we are talking about people-to-people contact and policy, I think that could be a good policy if it's working in the way that it is supposed that it's working. I can say that from our experience, since 2014, there is not even one group, one, that have visiting us in our independent project. That was different than before.
Interesting.
Before, sometimes groups from universities used to go to our space to have a talk like this one, and we were talking about the Cuban reality. But I don't know why, and it is supposed that now we will see an increase. Now there is not even one group that have been visiting us. Then the contact with embassy, not just with the American embassy. In the last time, they approached a little bit in relation also with the Obama visits. But all the embassies, the Spain embassy, Poland embassy, all the European embassy, they have less contact with us. And we are asking why. It is supposed that the new policy is addressed in the to empowerment, to empower the people. What is happening right now?
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. I quite frankly, I suspected that. I'm going to throw this open to questions. You know, I remember when I traveled to Cuba with a person who now works for Senator Corker and Mark Thiessen, who works for AEI. We knew we were tailed, but we went during the Pope's visit, and they were preoccupied with other things other than following us. But nevertheless, they did follow us around, and it was interesting to, you know, starting conversations with Cubans, ending up in their homes, talking with their families about the reality, and building this level of trust over a period of time. It's really interesting. The candor that comes out about what the problem is. They all know what the problem is. It isn't the bloqueo, it's the system. So I hope Americans have that opportunity, quite frankly, to do that. But, you know, I don't think sunbathers are going to liberate Cuba. And I think people need to take it a little more seriously, so they can leave with a clear conscience when they go to Cuba. So raise your hand if you'd like. Please identify yourself. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Identify yourself and form your question in the form of a question.
Okay. All right, hello, my name is Olivia de la Pena. I'm a student journalist, and one thing that I've been curious about is trying to get millennials and young people interested in talking about Cuba, because especially on my college campus, a lot of kids are in ardent support of Bernie Sanders. And back in, I believe it was the 80s, Bernie Sanders praised Castro for establishing health care and free education in Cuba. Now, what would be your reaction to those people who are saying, well, Castro did some good things to Cuba, and the fact that he established the system, while at the same time the system is subpar? How would you make the argument that in a sense, that same policy should not be applied to the U.S.?
Well, the point is that if you visit Cuba, you are going to realize that the public system is completely destroyed. And you have the healthcare is not working, the schools, most of the professors are leaving the country. All my generation, I study physics, and I'm a physicist, and most of my friends are outside of the country. The universities are almost empty. And the same situation you have in hospital. You have old physicians, too young physicians, but you don't have people in the middle. And when you see the situation that we are facing over there, it's a critical situation in everything. There is a kind of myth that people are repeating that the health system in Cuba is good, but you just need to visit the hospitals in Cuba. I think most of that hospital in everywhere will be closed. And I think that unfortunately there is a lot of propaganda about that situation. And both the health system in Cuba and the education system also is in a really, really bad condition. I think that this is, unfortunately, some people have a different vision, but the reality is not that.
So those are the people that should visit Cuba and see what's happening. Sir.
Hi, Roger Betancourt, University of Maryland. My question is about migration. What is the relationship that you see between the economic circumstances? People in your age bracket, as you were pointing out, have a strong incentive to migrate, and the Cuban Adjustment Act. The Cuban government seems to be trying to get the U.S. government to repeal it, for arguing that it provides an incentive for migration. A lot of people feel the incentives is the lack of opportunity in Cuba. What is your position with respect to both people who are trying to migrate and the Cuban Adjustment Act incentivizing them to do so?
Well, I think that there are different factors that are has influence in what is happening with immigration. And this is a question that always appears when we talk about Cuba. And one person from the State Department once asked me, why do you think that people are leaving the country right now if it is supposed that there are now certain level of optimism about what is going to happen? And I repeat to him a joke, chiste, no? Yes. Joke, that many people knows in Cuba. And the situation is that Fidel Castro called Pepito, and this is the guy that always is doing things that anybody expects. No? Fidel Castro called Pepito and said, Pepito, we have a big problem. Everybody is leaving Cuba. Nobody wants to return. Let's think what to do. I want that you go to Miami and talk to the people and see how you can bring back the people. Well, Pepito go to Miami. 3 weeks ago, he appeared with a lot of airplanes full of Cubans. And he go to see Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro asked to him, Pepito, what did you do that everybody's coming? And Pepito said, too simple, my commander. I told to them that you and your brother are going to move to Miami, and all the people return. And then I used to say that one of the points of this new policy is then send the signal that the Castros are going to be there. And then the normal reaction of the people was, if the Castro are going to be here, we need to leave. And of course, they know that the Cuban adjustment can change also because now there are normal relations. And then there is no exactly justification for that. Then I think the combination of all of this and also the critical economic situation that we have are the fact that are pushing a lot of Cubans now to leave the country. And I think that this is so important because always the Cuban regime have been selling the idea that they represent stability. And there are a lot of people that have been selling the idea that the American government need to negotiate with the Cuban regime because they are the only group that can govern the country. They have been selling that idea. But what we see in the reality is that the situation is the contrary. They are now in power. They send the message that they are going to be there for a while, and then the reaction of the people is we need to escape. And even inside of the country, and let's see what is going to happen, now people are feeling more frustrated than ever. Then I don't think that it's a good idea to sell that product. I think it's better to understand that in the opposition movement, in the Cuban civil society, are the ones that can really rule the country for better for the Cubans and for the whole region and for the United States. No?
Absolutely. I mean, I think stability is overrated, in my personal opinion. And if Lech Walesa can run Poland, I'll take any Cuban out of the phone book when they used to have phone books.
I'm Jaime Aparicio. I'm former ambassador of Bolivia. And, well, we thank you very much for this great update on Cuba. We are seeing some change in Latin America, important changes in the biggest countries. And my question is, how do you see an implosion of Venezuela would affect Cuba at least from the point of view of the people that it's in the opposition, of the people in the streets?
I think that what is happening in Venezuela is crucial for Cuba. And also what happened in Brazil. I think that the Brazil situation, the situation in Brazil, the Cuban regime didn't expect that happened that quickly. And we cannot forget that Brazil is the first investor in the Mariel port. And now that plan, that economic plan is stopped because they don't have any people that go there and put the money. And Lula da Silva was the sponsor of that project too. Then I think that the combination of what is happening in Venezuela and in Brazil is creating a really difficult scenario for the regime. And for sure, they need to move forward with the relation with U.S. But at the same time, they are too afraid. They are too afraid to lose the control. And then that's why I think that we are now from the opposition in a good situation. I think that this is a time to work really hard and to look for more allies and to show that we can be a power option for the future. We are working in that. We are trying to send all the signal we can send to the Cuban society. We are working really hard to distribute information because one of the things is that the Cuban government have the whole control of circulation of information in Cuba. And we are working hard in that. But I think that this is a special moment to take space inside of Cuba. And we are working really hard in that.
Absolutely. Other questions, Enrique, and this gentleman?
My name is Enrique Perez. I'm a retired U.S. government employee. And my question has to do with the role of the different churches in Cuba. The Catholic Church after the Pope's visit, the evangelical churches. You said that you had little contact now with some of the embassies than you did before. What about with the Catholic Church and with the other churches? Are they approaching you? Have they remained distant? And what could they do for the situation of human rights in Cuba in the future?
Well, I'm going to talk about the Catholic Church first. I think that unfortunately, and this is no secret for anybody, when Cardinal Ortega was as the Arzobispo of Havana, he was several times talking against the Cuban opposition movement. This is not a secret for anybody. But this is not the same situation for another obispos. I don't know how to say in English.
Archbishops.
Yeah, bishops. And we have had contact with them, some of them. We have been talking about the situation that we are facing, about the human rights violation, about our interest to have more contact with the Catholic Church. And we have had good reactions. Let's see now that the Ortega is no more as the Arzobispo of Havana. And our idea is to reestablish the contact with them and to see what can happen in that. I think that the role of the Catholic Church in Cuba is going to be fundamental because they are the only institution that is all around the country, and they have there are many people working and around the Catholic Church. I think that they need to play an important role. I hope that they assume that, and now with the new change that is inside of the church, they can play a positive role in the situation that we are facing. In relation with the another churches in Cuba, well, there are different groups. There are some of them that are too related with the government, following exactly the same line, but there are another people that no. There are another church that they are not following the same line that the government is pointing. Even in the last time, there is a repression against certain Protestant churches. And
I'm sorry, Protestants. Sorry,
Protestant churches. And then let's see what is going to happen. But we in general, we are positive about what is happening right now, because most of the people want to move forward. Most of the people are too tired. And the regime is not giving any option to anybody. Then I think that if we are, the opposition movement, start we push and we show to the rest of the Cuban society that we need to ask for our rights. And we can be more articulated. I think that this is going to have an impact in the rest of the society too. And also we are going to have a kind of feedback because most of the people now are also trying to get in contact with us. In the last time, some people working inside of the university have been making contact with us, asking because they have problems inside of the university, what they can do, how we can help them. Then I think that there is a good climate or weather, no?
Climate.
Climate, sorry.
That's perfect. Yeah.
And I think that we need to take advantage of that. This is a good moment, and we need to take advantage of that situation and to push.
I mean, I'm one who thinks that the U.S. embassy and all these embassies should be sort of empowering and engaging. It's a shame to me, I think, that they're pulling back. And one of the messages I've heard from other dissidents is that the Cuban regime is saying to them, you guys don't matter.
Yeah.
You don't matter, you lost because you lost the United States as an advocate. And so, you know, I hate to think that the only reason the European embassies were engaging you is because the Americans were always insisting. You know, Kirsten Madison was in the Bush administration. The Europeans saw her coming. They went the other direction because she went after them about, why don't you engage more on Cuba? And then you saw Francis travel to meet the Greek metropolitan within days of the regime tearing down Protestant churches. Not a word. You know, so these things are demoralizing. On the other hand, to the extent Cubans are getting more active, filling that space, taking full advantage, that's a positive thing. I just think that, you know, outsiders should care about these things, should care about these injustices and do what they can to help. Yes, sir.
Thank you. It was that famous Frenchman who said that the despotic regimes are in their greatest danger when they begin to reform themselves. And would you agree that the opening to China, I mean, it did happen in China too, the opening there created a fundamental change in the dynamic. The next day after Kissinger left, after his first visit in 1971, Lin Biao fled the country. The closest comrade to Mao Zedong showed that there was this incredible division within the country. And it was over. The question of one of the things that brought it to a peak, and Lin Biao fleeing and dying in a plane crash, was the question about relations with the United States and the Soviet Union. But it also, after Mao went, we saw again the great change. The moderates came, at least the pragmatists came to power, Deng Xiaoping, and they have brought about fundamental change in China that almost inconceivable when I was there in the 1970s. And it's unpredictable, but they had certain factors at work that sped it along in Cuba and China, including money investments coming from overseas Chinese and then the United States. But Cuba has, would you agree, I think, an amazing element in this dynamic, and that is the Cuban American population in the United States.
Yes.
And the connections, the ties, and as investments expand in Cuba, they sell more and more government enterprises. The Cuban American community is going to play an incredible role in this. And I think within 20 years, Cuba will not be able, like China, to separate, as you say, economic growth from political control.
Well, I think that that's why the Cuban regime doesn't want Cubans to be investing in Cuba. They don't want even the Cubans that are like me, that we are inside, they don't want us to do absolutely anything inside. They just want people completely far for the Cubans in order to try to keep the control. But I think that there is something that they cannot avoid, and they cannot avoid the pressure that we are doing from inside. And I think this is the key point here in the transformation. I don't want to think that little by little and in 20 years the regime is going to change. I don't want that. I don't have time for that. And there are a lot of people that doesn't have time for that. We want the change right now, and we are pushing for that. And in fact, we see results. If we talk about 1 year ago, 2 years ago, nobody can speak out in the street without being arrested and beaten by the police, and nobody react when they see that situation. And if you see what is happening right now, this is completely different. People are reacting. Of course, there is not the numbers that we need and we want, but at least we have the initial point for that. And we think that we cannot lose the opportunity. Because I like to make a comparison with the 400, 400 metros, 4x100 metros planos en la carrera. Exactly. 4 by 1. Exactly.
4 by 1.
You have a critical moment, and it's when one guy pass to the other the baton. If they can do all the pass, probably they are not going to arrive in the first place, the second, the third, but they are going to arrive. But if they lost the baton, they lost their career. And I think that we are now in that point. They are passing the baton. And then if we don't allow that, then we can win. And also that's why they are creating an illusion that the change is going to be in 2018, 2021. I don't know. No, we cannot buy that product. We need to say the change needs to be now. And probably it's not going to be in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 4 months. But our goal is the profound change of the country. And that's why I think we need to focus in that.
I mean, how many years did China have the economic opening, per se, before they ran tanks over people in Tiananmen Square? And do we, 10 years. Yeah, I mean, they were, I mean, we have to do better. Okay, 69. So 20 years after the opening of China, they ran tanks over people in Tiananmen Square. So we got to, hopefully, we'll do a little bit better than that for our friends in Cuba. But I got to tell you what, I'm going to go to another question. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'll tell you what were you going to say?
I think I agree with everything you said.
Yes.
I agree with everything you said, that the change is going to come, hopefully, much sooner, and we all should push for it and not go around making that our slogan is that, okay, in 20 years is all right. As soon as possible, but within 20 years. That won't be our slogan, though.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Roger. Thank you, Antonio. My name is Jose Cardenas. I'm a consultant here in Washington. Antonio, President Obama has about less than a year left in office. There will be a new president elected, U.S. president elected in November. If you could make recommendations on how U.S. policy should be recast or amended, altered, reformed for the next U.S. president, the next U.S. administration's policy towards Cuba, what would you recommend?
Well, I think that one crucial point is to stop the repression in Cuba. I think that the American government need to tell to the Cuban regime, you need to stop the repression. The second point that I think that could be really important is to ask to the regime to ratify the UN Human Rights Covenants. Because this is a direct way to ask to the Cuban regime, change your law, without the justification from the government to say that they are intervening in the internal issues. Because the Cuban government was talking all the time about the UN chart for the reestablish the relation with the US government. And they say, well, we need to use that as a pattern to see how it's going to behave your embassy and my embassy and all this kind of thing. And why they don't want to accept to ratify the UN Human Rights Covenants. Because the situation, and there is a really interesting article from a guy from the official point of view, and he explained in the article why the Cuban regime cannot ratify the UN Human Rights Covenants. And he explained in the article that if they start to implement that covenant, they are going to dismantle the system. I don't know if the article is in favor or is against, but the guy explained clearly how the ratification and implementation of that covenant is going to dismantle the totalitarian regime. And I think that this is one point that is critical too. And the other point is the clear recognition of the opposition movement in Cuba. I think that these 3 points can make a huge difference for the future.
Hopefully we'll have a president that's willing to do that. We'll go right here and then the lady in the back.
My name is Juan Bultari. I am an economist, formerly with USAID. I wanted to pick on a comment made by Ambassador Noriega on the effectiveness of assistance to potential civil society institutions under the rubric of democracy, promoting democracy. The question is, do you have a sense of how effective that type of assistance has been in the past? As the ambassador said, apparently it is gradually being decreased. So I wanted to get a sense of how effective, if any, has that assistance been in the past, and what type of assistance not only the U.S. but other democracies could provide to the opposition movement in Cuba.
But I think that assistance is fundamental because the Cuban government controls everything in the island. Then if we don't have that assistance, how to work? And we need, in order to develop what we are doing, we need to have that assistance. We need to have funds to work. But at the same time, as you say, there are a lot of criticism about the assistance, how to use that. But I think that now, if we have this new scenario, that some people can go there and see in the ground how things are working, I think that can make a difference. I think the newer scenario can help for the people that are working with Cuba, with the NGOs that are working in Cuba. Then they can find a way to go there and see in the ground how the people that they are working together, how they behave, how effective they are. And I think that now this is a good possibility. The other question was, sorry. Yes, sir? Okay. Thank you.
The lady in the back there.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Ruiz. I'm from NDI. I wanted to ask you a twofold question. You had mentioned the importance of the rule of law and kind of changing the framework away from the communist rule of law into something that is recognizant of the will of the people. Can you tell me a little bit if you know anything about the electoral reform that has been propositioned within the Communist Party? If there are any working groups, what kind of future do you see in terms of actual change being made within the rule of law that's present, right? And the second question is about opposition. It seems that the Cuban opposition is a bit fractured at the moment. There isn't a clear, I would say a clear leader or a clear common goal and identity. Can you speak a little bit about the struggles or the changes that are happening within the opposition groups?
Well, there is no rule of law in Cuba. We cannot. There are some people that are talking that they want to change from the law to the law. I don't understand that. If you go to the street and a couple of guys come to see you and say, get inside of the car, and you don't have any arrest order, you don't have anything, and you say, why? And they immediately start to beat you. I don't understand that law. There is no law in Cuba. They do whatever they need to do in order to keep the power. This is the law in Cuba. Then, the proposition to change the situation, and you mentioned the electoral law, there is no election in Cuba too. How we can talk about the election if you have the number of seats and you have the number of people that are going to be running for the seats? There is no political campaigns. There is no proposal. There is just one party. I don't understand when some people say in Cuba there are elections. I don't understand that. I think that for sure we want, at the end of this whole path, we want a free election in Cuba. But at the same time, I think that we need to be step by step before to go to an election process. And we need the freedoms and the rights to speak openly in the street, to go to the media, to have an independent party, to have a group of lawyers. We need several things before, at least small structure before to go to an election process. Because if no, we are going to legitimize the regime. And the regime probably is going to say, okay, I'm going to allow you 4 or 10 seats in the parliament, but at the end you are going to be there for nothing. And I don't want this kind of fake change. I want a real change. And the second question, related with the opposition. I think that this is normal to have different positions, different visions. For example, right now you have 2 big platforms. One that the name is the Mesa, La Mesa de Unidad de Acción Democrática, MUAT, something like that. And you have the forum. I belong to the forum. Our approach is that one part thinks that it is possible to be inside of the reforms. They see certain reforms that the government is giving. And our position is that we need profound changes. But I think that is normal. It is normal that you have different approach to what is happening in Cuba. And they are pushing in the direction that they think or they consider that they need to do. And we are pushing in the direction that we consider that we need to do. Of course, we have contact. Probably we can build together certain demands. But I think that this is normal. The government is always trying to send a message that the opposition is fractured, they can work together, they don't obtain any results. Why, if they are damn sure of that, they don't allow to us to go to the TV, to have a panel of discussion? Why they don't allow to us to go to the public space? If we cannot organize anything, if we are delinquents and we are mercenary and all this kind of thing that they say. I told once to a journalist from the Cuban television, I told to her, please invite me to your round table. I want to be there. I want to be discussing with the people from the government in front of the Cuban audience. But they never do that because they know perfectly that in the moment that we can speak out, they lost the control. And that's why they are going to be always in the behaving in this repressive wave, and they are not going to allow us to be speaking out in any place.
No space whatsoever, no civil society. We're going to take 2 more questions. This gentleman.
Hi, my name is Aaron Rosen from the Bank of Tokyo. I had a question regarding the dynasty building issues that you mentioned earlier. So one of the main criticisms of U.S. engagement in Cuba has been that the engagement of the president has kind of legitimized and stabilized and solidified the rule of the Communist Party. But when I was in Cuba in 2012, it seemed that the Communist Party was very stable in its power and very legitimized within the country. And so when you talked about the, let's say, the facilitation of dynasty building, I was wondering if you would link it to the engagement policy or if this was something that was happening previous to the engagement and independent of it. Muchísimas gracias por su punto de vista. Gracias.
Well, in 2012, the Cuban regime was not recognized as a partner for the American government. The European Union has something that they call common position too. And the only people that have fluid relation with the regime was, Russia and all these countries. For sure, they keep relations, but right now you have a different dynamics. Europe is canceling the common position. They are canceling the debt also, the economic debt with that government. And now they are pushing for more economic interaction. And I think that this is creating a difficult scenario for us as opposition movement, because they don't want to talk with the opposition movement. We were talking previously about that. And also in 2012, they didn't have the critical situation that now they are facing. I mean, in the economic area. And we were complaining that if the deal that is now running could be in a better framework, will be really more useful for the people. And this is our complaint. We have been telling all the time that we consider that the political process could be the solution for our situation, but we consider also that we need a better deal. We need a real deal. And this is what I think that we need right now. And I think that that's why the Cuban regime feel more comfortable, because they now reach that the people accept them as they are, without any conditions to talk.
I mean, let me just make a brief comment on that. I helped write the Helms-Burton legislation, which, by the way, the president can not only suspend most of the embargo, but provide assistance to a transitional government if there's a transition underway, which includes a commitment to elections, not holding elections, but a commitment to elections, dismantling the police state, recognizing political freedoms or liberties, freeing political prisoners, and don't jam outside broadcasting, and labor rights. The dirty little secret is Cuba is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that cannot meet any of these conditions. And so we've chucked it out the window. We just said, okay, well, the president has hot-wired the law and just worked around these conditions. But think about what we're giving up, you know? I think it's not an unreasonable proposition that Cuba should be as good at one of these things as Haiti is, or as good at one of these things as Venezuela is, or Bolivia, or Nicaragua. So, I mean, I really think we've sold the Cubans short, and I don't have a guilty conscience about that, because I've been opposed to the president's strategy, mainly because I don't think he really gave due consideration to some of the consequences of legitimizing a regime that legitimized in their own, in their own reality, in their own world, but not legitimate in any sense of being an elected government and that sort of thing. One last question, if there is one. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Francis.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that the Eastern European countries, I've been involved in the transformation, Poland, Hungary, and other Eastern European countries the last 25 years. And the Eastern European countries weren't looking to the U.S. government for leadership. They took their own initiative, and I've been to many events at the Czech embassy in particular. The Hungarian ambassador called me to try to engage me in Cuba in 2006. So they were very aggressive. So it's not a matter of waiting for the U.S. government to give them direction. They understand what communism is, they understand what totalitarianism, and understand what the conditions in Cuba were. So it's important to continue to reach out to those governments. Looking on and following these transformations and transitions as they occurred, there was a lot going on beneath the surface beforehand. And as you were talking, I'm wondering about the information level that people have available, the Samstats, these underground newspapers, underground communications, because the vast number of the population understood that they needed a change, and they were looking for the catalyst to do that. And that's one question I have. How much of that is going on beneath the surface? And then it's understanding that there needs to be a catalyst, because I look at what happened in Tunisia. When that entrepreneur burned himself, everybody said, enough's enough. And look at what happened in Poland. Look at what happened in Hungary. Followed the Berlin Wall. All of these things, there was always a catalyst. But you had the foundation laid beneath the surface. I think one of the things I find most disconcerting about one of the points you made is that the you can change the law. You can give the rights to own a business and run a business and so forth. But if the criminal element of the government controls the inputs. So, okay, I've got a business, but in order to buy the meat for the business, I've got to go through these people, and they're going to charge me a premium, or they're not going to give me the meat. So my restaurant goes down the tubes. That's a different issue altogether. That both have to be dealt with. And I think that's why you talk about the need for drastic change. But you can still have rule of law. You can still have, you can have laws like that, creating businesses. So it's kind of meaningless if you can't get inputs, and they can close you down or they can help you become successful. But it's parasitic. And so the government has an interest in keeping these things alive, in creating these things, and being a parasite and sucking off the wealth. So, how do you deal with that, number one? And then, of course, what is the state of the underlying, undersurface activity that's going on in terms of the people? Cuban people understanding they need to change this regime.
Well, that's why I was talking that we need like two parallel paths. We need to, in one hand, to be pushing from the actions. We need to the activists need to be pushing to the rest of the people to go to the street, to protest, to speak out, to demand from the regime. But at the same time, we are thinking how to send a clear message for the people that are, some of them, even inside of the regime, and they are not in the elite, they are in another levels, and they want also, in some moment, to be part of the change. And I think that's why I was mentioning that we need to be working in both paths at the same time, because nobody knows what can happen in some moment. And one day, people go to the street, things start to increase, the situation starts to get worse, and we need the other part. We need the other part in order to send a clear message that we are a political option for the future. Then we are completely clear that inside of the regime, and just asking for certain changes, nothing is going to change at the end. They are going to continue keeping the control over everybody. Then the idea is to move in these two paths. In one hand, to push, and create a real pressure, and in the other path, to show our proposal, our possibility to be a future power or a future government. But in this situation, we need also the support from the international community, because we are dealing with a kind of government that he feels totally impunity to repress us. Then I think that the change in Cuba is a combination of all of these factors. For sure, we need, the change is going to come from inside, is going to come from Cubans, but we need the support of the international community in order to finish with this situation that we are facing right now in Cuba.
I want to thank you very much. That was an excellent set of questions from all of you, and terrific answers, very, very impressive. And I think if Cuba is in the hands of someone like you, or groups like you, I think the future looks very bright indeed. I want to thank Mark Wachtenheim for arranging this encounter and his cooperation in putting this together. One of the things I want to emphasize is, having been ambassador to the Organization of American States and Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, was that it happened in earnest when President Obama took office, that the Caribbean countries and Latin American countries started leaning on us over the lifting the embargo, and as if that were the problem in Cuba. And the proposition that President Obama sold was that if we lift this embargo and if we normalize relations, that it creates space for the Latin American and Caribbean countries to be more vocal and speak up, because they're not seen as taking our lead on these things. And none of that's happened, as far as I can tell. And you've ratified that. Even the European and some of the Eastern European and the American government's embassy is pulling back in support of the legitimate representatives of the Cuban people who are not the regime, not a Stalinist regime. And that was the, some of us knew that was the case, that what was happening was the Cuban government lobbying Latins and Caribbeans to go and harass the Americans about their policy. And it's just remarkable to me that these people don't have the conscience to care about their Cuban brothers and sisters now that the U.S. has normalized relations, as if, well, okay, that's settled. But you still settled except for 11 million people living as captives of the Castro brothers. And so, this is something, I'm very pleased that all of the people are here, showing a level of interest, in some cases a level of support for what you're trying to do in Cuba. I think the real stability will come when you have a legitimate government in Cuba, freely chosen by the Cuban people, and it is absolutely unfair that people have to make a decision between whether they cooperate with the regime or whether they engage with people or take care of themselves. And what the only thing that matters is whether you care about that injustice or not. I think most of us care, and I think more of us should. So thank you very much, Antonio Rodiles, and God bless, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for all you. Thank you.